Belly. You can see she's maybe going to make a liar out of me now, because she is seeming to eat that. Okay, so my sheep are destroying my reputation on camera. So this is African thistle. I don't know its botanical name. I'll put it on the screen if I remember. And it is one of about, I don't know, maybe 3, 4, 5 particularly invasive weeds that we have here on the farm. This is how it sort of goes after it's finished its growth and flowering life cycle. It's excessively spiky, and for that reason, I suppose, the sheep will not graze it. And as far as I can tell, no other animals will either. And it also doesn't break down, so even when it dries off like this, it tends to just sort of go quite hard and blow around in the wind, and it's just as spiky as when the thing was alive. So we have quite a lot of this on the upper section where the topsoil is far shallower and rockier. And it's one of the weeds that we really need to get on top of. This is a milk thistle, which we have far less of, and the sheep will eat this. Not maybe once it gets to this phase so much, but during its growing phase, the leading stem in particular is just full of water, and when they eat it, you can actually see the water spraying out of it. It's almost like a cucumber. So they'll eat this one. This is an invasive species, but for us it's much less of a problem, and it's also very common in throughout the region. Although we, like all weeds or plants that are identified as weeds, we would, in the ordinary course of things, kind of have a program of removal or control of this. The weeds that we have here is blackberry. Yeah, there's a fair bit of blackberry on this place. We have removed it, and sort of every winter we try and remove some. But the sheep will eat blackberry, and the berries are particularly nutritious for them, as are the young leaves, and the thistles on the stem don't seem to bother them either. And of course the fruit is entirely delicious. And because we don't spray here, we have never sprayed, no issue of contamination or anything. Actually, they're very, very ripe and very sweet now. Not as big as they've been in previous years, but still very nice. This is hawthorn here. And I suppose you could say this is another weed that we have here. And indeed, technically it is, I think it's declared as an invasive weed in the state of Victoria, but it's not one that we're especially worried about. I think probably the concern with it is that it's just so easily able to be spread around, so birds enjoy eating these little red berries, which contains the seed, and then disperse it far and wide. I think it might get into waterways, etc. But here it's not so much of a problem. Sheep will eat it, and indeed, one year I used the hawthorn berry to make a syrup, which I understand is very good for cardiac health. And certainly the syrup was very nice, probably because it's made with brandy. And it's a pretty plant as well, a pretty tree, deciduous. So the other weed that we have is Patterson's curse. and happily I don't think I'd have any to show you at the moment, but it's probably the weed that we pay most attention to because it is very invasive. It does cause concern for some people. Some people are really not bothered by it at all, and indeed, you know, it's being called Salvation Jane because it's considered to be a form of fodder that will grow when nothing else will. You might sort of sensibly ask what our approach to weed control is, and the answer to that is essentially we try for manual removal. We have just 4.2 acres here, which to our mind means that in a situation whereby we were spending a lot of time here, it would be possible to have a weed removal sort of plan. You know, just an hour or so a day, it does a surprising amount in terms of making a dent in the weeds that we have. So we think we can handle it manually. At the moment, that is difficult because we are not here all the time, so we can't spend an hour a day on it. So that's not ideal, and that explains, I think, a little bit why the weeds, some weeds at least, like that African thistle I've shown this morning, gets a bit out of control. But for the most part, we've managed to control Patterson's curse this year because that was the particular weed that we focused on. The position that we take and that we feel is right for us is that there are no chemical weed control agents that we would wish to use here. Whether or not it's marketed to be organic, whether or not it's marketed target specific, that is to target the weed only and not disturb other things, I just don't have confidence in those sorts of claims. And I think history tells us that to the extent that those claims are not right, you won't find out about it until many years after the fact, by which case the damage has already been done. So I'm very concerned about chemicals and indeed fertilizers as well. I'm very cautious about using fertilizer now, you know, even sort of basic NPK type stuff. Having an indirect impact, very worried about it getting into waterways, and just having a bunch of disturbances that are not ideal and that we are not really cognizant of, and that the suppliers will not readily tell you because they don't have an interest in telling. It's not to be a skeptic about it and to suggest malice on the part of anyone. I think that's just the reality of the situation. The other thing is that we are not primary producers per se, so for us personally, the weeds aren't a huge problem. If we were surrounded by properties that were engaged in primary production, there is one, a couple of fields down, and if we thought that that was compromising their operation at all, then we would rethink the situation about not using a weed control agent. I can conceive of situations where manual removal is just not possible, and so you kind of forced to look at other options, including sort of chemical control. And it's always a matter of just weighing the pros and cons up, I suppose. Having vast tracts of land covered by that African thistle that I've taken out this morning, for instance, would certainly not be good because it would compromise the grazing capacity of the land for both farmed animals and other wild animals to great an extent. So you would need to do something about that. So this morning I've spent a little while, in fact it hasn't taken me very long at all, to dig some of it out. You can see at the base of the plant it's actually regrowing, so even though the plant is the main foliage that is flowered, etc., is dead, it's regrowing from the bottom. That's pretty much the case in all that I've pulled up. it grows from a rhizome, so getting it out is going to be difficult. Seed head is going everywhere, so this really is not the right time to do this. So definitely a case of don't follow me. But one of the reasons that I'm pulling it out now is because it is really very spiky. It does take up a lot of pasture that could otherwise be grazed, and also when the sheep are trying to graze around it, I think one of the lambs maybe came into contact with one of the spikes and it did hurt their eye. Fine now, but I just want to start to remove it. But you know, it's clearly the case that even if they will nibble at it, if I've taken it out and make it look interesting, for the most part they won't touch this.